Bienvenidos a todos y todas a esta conversación virtual.
Welcome, everyone, to this virtual conversation with the applicants for commissioners of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. This election will be taking place in June at the general meeting. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are extremely grateful for your time and willingness to participate in this event. We also thank those who are joining us on the different platforms and in different parts of the Americas. For those of you who are following us on Zoom, we do have simultaneous translation available into Spanish, English, or Portuguese. This event is organized by the Center for Justice and International Law, the Due Process Foundation, Latin American and Caribbean Network for Democracy, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Foundation Rule of Law Program for Latin America, and the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. All of our organizations have shared for many years the commitment to support initiatives that strengthen the capacity of the inter-American system to promote and protect human rights. A crucial way in which we believe that we can carry out this commitment is by looking for potential ways to apply some of the principles and values that we promote, such as transparency, participation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. These principles can also be applied to electing people to leadership positions in our regional human rights system. Due to time constraints, we will not present the resumes of the applicants, but we'd like to invite you to read them in the communication materials for this event on our social networks. And you can also find it on the website of the OAS and CJIL. Today's dialogue is a small but important contribution to provide greater visibility and encourage the participation of stakeholders in the process. We hope this effort will be a genuine contribution to choosing the best people to lead a vital human rights institution. As we know, for many people, the Iachr is in many cases the only hope that victims of human rights violations in our region have. Finally, I can't fail to mention that there is gender parity in the candidates, something that has been reflected as a commitment by the states in the latest resolutions adopted by the OAS General Assembly. We hope that this is a sign that our region is now moving towards greater gender equality and that it ensures equity among our institutions. This dialogue will be organized as follows. We'll have 4 rounds of questions, each with its moderator, and they will be from the organizing institutions. The first 2 questions have been shared in advance with applicants, and each will have 4 minutes to answer the questions. Your microphone will go out in 4 minutes, and also in the room, we can switch off your microphone and turn the floor over to the next applicant. For the third question, there has been a consultation with society networks, and each panelist was given 3 of the questions posed. They will be able to choose 1 question or to refer to all of them. Questions are about the Inter-American Commission work, migration, cautionary measures, and the issues that are being faced by the Commission at the moment. The 4th round will be 2 minutes for each panelist, and you will also be able to give a brief farewell message. So let's start with the first question. I'll turn it over to Hannah Iachr from PPLF. Thank you. Dear applicants, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for joining us this week. Andrea Pocha will be the first one, and Christopher Arif Volkan, Edgar Rallon, Gloria, Lydia, and Pier Paolo. So having said this, I proceed to the first question. Internal challenges at the Iachr. We have internal issues concerning resources that are available. What should be topics that should be prioritized by the IATHR? Should the IATHR address these challenges with the same methodologies, practices, and tools that it has already? And rapporteurs. Thank you to the organizations that have put together this mechanism. Congratulations for the transparency. All of these mechanisms are welcome. It's hard to choose the priorities. We need to think about human rights issues that are faced by all of our countries. So the violence of security forces, penitentiaries, and violence generated by organized crimes in our countries. This is a problem that leads to the violation of human rights. The second topic that we find across the countries is equality, legal equality as well as structural equality. Often, these issues are delayed historically in our countries. And the third one is democratic institutionality, lack of credibility by democratic powers that be in defending human rights. All countries face those issues, some more than others. There are specific problems affect certain regions like the Caribbean and others, and this issue should be faced by our Commission. Obviously, there are different tools. The request system shouldn't be the only one. It's a different system. It shouldn't be the only one, and it should be made stronger. You will hear me say that these tools need to be strengthened. Political tools and the incidents among governments, authorities, human rights organizations need to recover their ability to act in each of these countries. Thank you so much. And now I will turn it over to candidate Christopher.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this invitation. In terms of hemispheric challenges in the area of human rights, and especially because of resource challenges, I would single out 3 areas deserving of prioritization, partly because of their gravity and partly because solutions would entail structural changes that, if implemented, could have positive ripple effects across society. The first concerns certain populations in situations of extreme precarity and vulnerability, notably indigenous peoples, women, irregular migrants, and LGBTI persons. They are more likely to be the victims of human rights violations because of non-existent or discriminatory legislative frameworks, compounded by weak institutions and societal prejudice. Shifting those attitudes, reforming structural environment is essential to eliminating discrimination and enabling full participation by them. Secondly, poverty and inequality are escalating in rich and poor countries alike and should be addressed in a more integrated manner. Third, citizen security is a problem affecting the quality of life of citizens, especially women, children, and the elderly. Given the failure of traditional approaches even to moderate this problem, there is a dire need for more innovative solutions, I think. And for this reason, I would favor strategies that focus on prevention, in addition to the standard ones of just criminalization and punishment. This means more attention to rehabilitation and things like penal reform, and generally programs that seek out to address the root causes of crime. Internally, the Commission's procedural backlog is a persistent problem that requires ongoing attention. Since the petition system is one of its central pillars. As to its methodologies, in addition to the strategies mentioned above, I must acknowledge that some of the Commission's existing practices have been very successful in the past and hold continued value still, such as its country visits, its reports, which serve critical functions of monitoring, information gathering, and facilitating timely and tailored interventions. In addition, I would emphasize a greater role for promotional activities as well as political interventions through dialogue and leveraging existing relationships with states, which are approaches that are more likely to be received favorably and impact positively. Regarding the backlog, the first observation I'd like to make is that cases cannot only be dealt with in a chronological order, as that might result in complete irrelevance given the backlog that is now said to be almost 2 decades. While chronology is the most equitable approach, I do think deviation should be allowed in situations of crisis or great urgency, and relatedly, where precautionary measures may be pending, or where the subject matter might be novel or presents an opportunity for developing the norms and standards of the system. A mix of these approaches will enable the Commission to steadily reduce its backlog while at the same time remaining responsive to current needs. Other strategies could be the joinder of repetitive cases, tighter management of deadlines, and streamlining expertise within the body, which might enhance specialization and thus increase efficiency. Thank you.
Gracias, candidato Arif Pulkan. Con eso le pasamos la palabra al comisionado.
Over to
Muchas gracias. Muy buenas
Hello.
tardes. Saludo a mis colegas.
Thank you. Good afternoon
Candidatas y también a
to
las personas conectadas. La pregunta,
the
¿cuáles son los
applicants and
temas
all
que
of those
consideran deben
joining
ser
us online.
priorizados por la
The question is, which should
De
be the
acuerdo con el plan
priorities for the
estratégico que fue
Iachr?
aprobado
The strategic plan
durante
that
periodo en la comisión,
was approved
yo
by
priorizaría
the
dos
Commission.
aspectos que tienen que
I
ver con el
would
impacto del
prioritize a
sistema
couple of
interamericano.
aspects that have to do
El
with
primero
the
de ellos es la expansión de las
The first one,
soluciones amistosas.
expand friendly
Primero
solutions.
se incrementa el acceso a la justicia interamericana y la expansión
We need
de
to
las
increase
soluciones
access to
amistosas
inter-American
permitiría
justice, and
también abordar de una
if we
manera
expand those
más
solutions, that would
eficiente
allow us
el
to
retraso
address
procesal que existe en el sistema interamericano. Y el otro aspecto
the
que priorizaría
current
sería el
backlog
fortalecimiento
we
del
see in Latin
seguimiento
America.
de
The
las
other priority would be to
recomendaciones y
strengthen
del CIMORE, porque
monitoring
allí
of
en el
recommendations
sistema
at
de
Timori,
monitoreo de
because
recomendaciones y en el seguimiento de las recomendaciones
in
de
the
lograrse la
recommendation
implementación,
monitoring system
allí
and
está
in
el impacto que la
monitoring
Comisión
those
puede
recommendations,
lograr
that
de acuerdo a
is
sus
where
instrumentos.
the Commission could have an
Esta
impact
pregunta también tiene otro
through its
componente
instruments.
y es si se deben abordar estos retos
This
con
question
las
has
mismas
another
metodologías y prácticas.
that
Yo
we
les
should
diría
address those
que
challenges using the same
habría que darle
approaches and
continuidad a
practice.
las
I would say
metodologías que han sido exitosas,
we should
pero
continue
reforzaría, sin duda alguna,
using
la labor de promoción y de
basics of
capacitación,
mentorship, but I would
reforzaría las visitas académicas de alto
reiterate
nivel
notion
y reforzaría
capacity
la
building,
metodología
high
de
level
un diálogo
visits to
sostenido con los
academia, and
estados, porque
a
precisamente
dialogue that is
cuando existen
by
ya
different
recomendaciones
states, because
pendientes de cumplimiento, es el
when there
diálogo
are pending
efectivo con
recommendations,
los estados el que permite
effective
superar
dialogue with the
obstáculos
states
para que una
is what will allow
recomendación
us to
pueda
overcome
implementarse
obstacles
y esa
so that
recomendación resuelva un
recommendations can
problema,
be
sea
implemented, so
coyuntural
that these
o
recommendations can
estructural. Y en esa solución
be
que se
circumstantial
llega al
or
implementar una
structural
recomendación,
issue.
ese es el legado que va quedando del impacto del sistema interamericano en el fortalecimiento
And that
de la
will
cultura
leave
de los derechos
a
humanos.
legacy
Muchas gracias.
that would strengthen the culture of human rights. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. And I will turn it over to Gloria.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable and marginalized populations in the Americas and the Caribbean, such as indigenous and tribal peoples, women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. The injustices and inequalities revealed by COVID-19 place the elderly, disabled, and chronically ill into higher risk categories. Climate change operates on a similar scale of injustice, and its effects will be felt more acutely by older persons. They are more likely to suffer even during disasters. For example, older people face difficulties reaching safety, and are so more susceptible to climate-related events like air pollution, heat waves, disease outbreaks. Persons with disabilities and those who are chronically ill face similar challenges. By working together with governments, international and regional human rights agencies, civil society organizations on the ground, the Commission can prioritize these human rights and well-being of these groups and advocate for measures to ensure that everyone, regardless of their age, ability, or health status, are included in, for example, very simply, disaster planning and disaster response efforts. Another example of priority issue is the protection of indigenous and tribal populations from extractive industries and climate injustice. For instance, the Commission could investigate and provide recommendations to governments on how to support indigenous and tribal peoples. Directly connected is also the protection of human rights defenders. The Commission could advocate for measures to promote sustainable development, including the use of renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and forestry practices, not by itself, of course, but in concerted efforts with those that are already on the ground, governments and civil society organizations. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, candidata de ley. Le paso la palabra a la candidata.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Iachr Casas Becerra. Good afternoon to all. The topics that I will mention are related to 4 issues, which I will summarize: violence, different types of violence, problems related to access to justice, vulnerabilities of different communities, and also the procedural problems. The first point, we have to mention that violence concerns all different societies. One of the main challenges of the Commission is to seek these common points so that there isn't a lack of compatibility between the measures adopted by the states with the international standards. Because today we're in a pendulum in the ways we think, and some can't adopt measures, and there are other measures which go against the rights. One of the groups that is affected by violence are the women, but also the groups with sexual diversity. Many of the problems that arise at the Commission are related to the issue that the countries can't solve the violation of human rights internally. So it's very important to work with the public prosecutors, the judges, and many times through topics and agreements, we only work with the executive branch, but in fact, we should be dialoguing with all the branches, legislative and judiciary. The friendly solutions are very important, but they also are adopted by the executive branch. So there is a discrepancy between the executive branch and legislative. It makes things very difficult to go forwards. Inequality is structural as well in the continental Americas and the Caribbean. So the problems related to violence are much more difficult. It's much easier for the youth to work with the drug dealers than having an honest job. So we have to work on these issues. And the problems that the Commission has are the delay in all the cases, all the backlog. But the states are part of this. We have to see very carefully the solutions that we can adopt, and then we can have the dialogues with measures that can be implemented with specific measures. These cases should be judged quicker, and some of them need to have a quick intervention by the Commission. Thank you very much. And now to end this round of questions, I will give the floor to Pier Paolo Pigozzi. All the areas that the candidates have mentioned as priorities are systematic problems of this region. I think we have to put them in order of priority, but I don't want to tell my colleagues, I'm not criticizing my colleagues, I'm just saying that the priorities and the more pressing issues are those that dictate the priorities. And all the items mentioned by my colleagues are part of the strategic plan, and they are priorities. So I find it difficult to think that we can delay some of the things. So that's not what I want to say when I talk of priority areas. I think that we have to consider that with the limiting resources that we have, which are the problems we're going to face first. I think the main issues of the region have been mentioned, and I think we need to consider the possibility of analyzing all the problems and how to deal with them. It's interesting, this question, if we should face these challenges with the same practical methodologies as used by the Iachr. But if we consider the best practices, we have to continue with everything that has brought good results. But I also believe that we need to renew the personnel. And I think by renewing 4 commissioners, I think that in the next term, we have to try and find other methods, such as artificial intelligence, to group all these issues, and using methods to help with all the requests that the Commission receives every year. And they have implemented a method to filter these cases by relevance, severity, but there are hundreds, thousands of cases, and this can lead to a private dialogue with international institutions, and that way we can find funds for the institution. I am in favor of exploring these new methods, which we haven't implemented till now. Thank you very much, Candidate Pigozzi. So now we will go to the second question, which will be moderated by my colleague, Anna. So the order of the answers will be Pier Paolo Pigozzi, Lidia Casas Becerra, Gloria Monique Demes, Edgar Stuardo Ralón, Christopher Arif Vulcan, and Andrea Pochat. The question, in recent years, the region has seen that governments elected democratically, they gradually assumed authoritarian tendencies, which led to a decline in the civic space. Here we're talking about attacks on judicial independence, violations of freedom of expression, the right to protest, criminalization of human rights defenders, justice operators, journalists, and representatives of the opposition, laws that limit the work of civil society, questioning of the independence of the judiciary, etc. So how can the Commission do its work in such a challenging context? Should the IACHR work in a more coordinated manner with the actors? And if so, which are these actors and how should it be done? So we'll start with Pier Paolo Pigossi. All these problems prevail in the region. The threat to judiciary independence, the right of expression, the rights to journalists, the justice defenders, human rights defenders, they are constantly attacked in the American history. And it's worrying because we know that this can become more violent. And so far, we haven't been able to approach these tensions in a more adequate manner. And these tensions always exist in a democratic society. One step before analyzing the actions of the government and against authoritarianism, we have to believe that our societies are very polarized and that they have total approval or disapproval. I believe that the Inter-American Commission can do a lot in the way it communicates and how it approaches the different actors, and also the language that they use to include the different actors. And the dialogue isn't only exchanging words, but also to work together in the different projects and programs, because there might be disagreement, but we might meet with some actors, new ideas with new projects which will go forward in these areas, and that will increase the level of acceptance. We also have the questioning of the international organizations and also the questioning from the journalists and also the defenders of human rights. I would like to differentiate here if these are constructive criticism and not to think immediately that this is violence. I think we are all subject to this public criticism, and we have to know how to react. And the Commission has a leadership position in relation to constructive criticism, even when there is a negative criticism. The work of the Commission isn't strengthened when there is no when there are no critics, but it goes forward when it receives the criticism, and the Commission knows how to do that. And it should base its decisions and its reports based in the reality and stand back a bit from the development of standards and norms, and for the recommendations which can explore other areas where the Commission doesn't put any emphasis. 4 minutes. Now, candidate Lidia Casas Becerra, thank you very much for your question. I believe that the topics which were mentioned as a challenge are very big. I think one of the most relevant issues is related to the justice and judicial independence. I think one of the ways that the Commission can work in favor of the judicial independence is starting to work with good best practices. And they and other organizations of legal system of other countries. We should mention the best practice practices and not only the criticisms that can be made to the system. And that will always help and bring mutual collaborations to improve the existing system. We have to think that the judicial system can be involved with other interests. It's very important to think about society. Social violence have affected many countries from the north and the south. So how can we develop some of these discussions in terms of social discussions? If we consider that pendulum that we have in the region. And that way we can ensure these social demonstrations and also develop protocols in relation to the use of force. It's not that in some situations we can't use force by the state when they are destroying assets, but how to use force? I think we need the protocols for that. And it's also very important to bring other actors to ensure the protection of human rights and the possibility of the social society taking part in that. And this is a situation that we face in the Americas. This has to be done in a coordinated manner, not only with the state and entities, but also with civil society. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Gloria Monique Diemez. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you also for this question. Very important in the Americas in general. And I believe that through dialogue and advocacy, the Commission should continue to engage with governments in order to renew the consensus around the importance of human rights. This can involve engaging in constructive consultations and activities with government officials and with other government stakeholders. There are institutions that are operating in our countries that play a role in terms of transparency and accountability. The Supreme Audit institutions, for example. Another potential approach is focusing on preventative measures such as promoting education and awareness about human rights, and thereby strengthening institutions. Law enforcement institutions, for example, not only to protect and serve in general, but to specifically better protect human rights. But also strengthening institutions such as the judiciary, such as civil society organizations that deal specifically with human rights. By working collaboratively with other actors which are active on the ground, such as international agencies, the UN agencies, for example, regional cooperation mechanisms, integration bodies. I'm thinking of CARICOM, the Association of Caribbean States. This could include sharing information, coordinating efforts, which would avoid duplication of efforts on the one hand, and on the other hand, pooling resources to benefit and target specific interventions or vulnerable groups. Furthermore, explore partnerships with local civil society organizations and academic institutions that can provide valuable insights and perspectives, and back that up with research and monitoring and designing capacity building initiatives for example, law enforcement again, or government agents. Working with and within a network of different stakeholders can also lead to more effective advocacy and lobbying for policy changes that support human rights. So in my perspective, it's a concerted efforts of local, national, and international agencies and civil society on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will turn it over to Commissioner Edgar Stewart Rollon. Thank you so much. How can the Commission do its work within a challenging context where there is a reduction in the civil space when we work with the team of the Executive Secretariat to create a strategic plan? We have identified precisely that challenge, specifically Program 13 of the strategic plan, which establishes that it should promote and establish the rule of law, democratic institutions, and independence. And what this program seeks to do is to identify structural problems or to have an effect, a timely effect on specific human rights crisis. So how can we strengthen that mechanism? Many of these situations have different causes and they have different magnitudes. And that's why we should use different instruments to deal with them. One of them has to do with capacity building provided to different officials working for the state to keep a reminder and to have training on the inter-American standards on each of the topics to make sure that through dialogues, through sustainable dialogue, we can identify the issues. Also a methodology that brings together different types of training, that can organize work meeting and to identify specific problems that can lead to these challenging situations, such as we could find structural problems, since we're talking about depending on the judiciary, and there may be the need to eliminate specific obstacles that don't allow magistrates to be chosen based on their capacity. So these issues need to be debated within democratic proceedings and within democratic institutionality. So we need to identify those failures and problems, and that is only possible through sustainable dialogue and through a methodology, so that this can be a constructive and ordered dialogue. Over the last 4 years, what I have learned that even within those challenging scenarios, we should never break with dialogue, because when there is no dialogue, we can't advance any agendas, we can't implement anything. And these victims might not have a support point because the dialogue with the state has been broken. Therefore, we have to have respectful, sustainable dialogue. It has to be done in good faith, and it needs to be kept in the most challenging of scenarios. And that is where we need to effect change, so that we can finally find alternatives to strengthen this democratic institutionality. Thank you so much. Thank you for your answer, Commissioner Rollon, and now I will turn it over to Christopher Arif Bolkan. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. And this question, as others have mentioned, is dire indeed, paints a dire picture, but it's very relevant because I think even if states haven't reached all of these or all of these conditions don't qualify for a particular state. There are elements that exist everywhere, individual elements. So the first point I would wish to underline is that where all or any exist, it is imperative to maintain communication with the state concerned. The most influential actor in guaranteeing rights and protecting the markers of democracy is the state. So once a state remains in dialogue with the commission or the system, the door remains open to advocacy and negotiation for reform. So all opportunities for dialogue should be maximized through, the processes of communication, confidential letters, sharing of reports, and even on individual cases as regards friendly settlements or petitions. Relatedly, I would caution against treating the state as a homogeneous entity, or more obviously, as against treating the central government as representative of the entire state. It is important to note that government is an inexact categorization for what can be a sprawling entity comprising 3 horizontal branches of executive, legislature, and judiciary, supported by a civilian network of public servants. Except for the most repressive countries, there are bound to be individuals scattered across this network, populating all the branches, who disagree with anti-rights tendencies and may be sympathetic to reform. So my point is, cultivating or leveraging relationships with those individuals in the public service, especially those highly placed who may be able to moderate the worst excesses or influence policy, can lead to legislative and policy reform. As well, alliance rank and file members of the public service can also be useful, as they are the ones who can provide remedies and alleviate violations in individual cases. But of course, given the extent of the situation that you've painted, obviously you need a multifaceted approach, and critical to this as well is strengthening civil society. The obvious methods through training, technical assistance, and other forms of material support, particularly so that they can learn the techniques and practices to advocate on their own behalf. I think some of the obvious strategies here would be multi-stakeholder processes, providing support for victim support services, and support for strategic litigation. All of this would help to empower civil society and achieve a coordinated response to this. Not forgetting that a key element of this is the media and watchdog groups, given their role in publicizing abuses and countering disinformation. Of course, the Commission alone can't be effective in such a challenging environment, so I agree that partnerships with other actors is essential. I'd particularly like to single out NHRIs, which have proven to be hugely impactful where they exist because of their quasi-governmental status, their official origins and national recognition. They tend to have the ear of play a vital role. And of course, there are the other obvious bodies like intergovernmental ones that can facilitate a developmental agenda. I think these would be the key alliances for the Commission to seek out and cultivate, and to help provide context and standard-based guidance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before we move to the next block, have our last applicant, Andrea Pochak. Thank you so much for the question. This is a key topic. The question is, how should the Inter-American Commission work in the current context where we see more of an authoritarian trend? I'd like to rephrase the question. I would also ask, what has the Commission been doing over time which has supported this authoritarian trend? So I emphasize the need for the Inter-American Commission to go back to having a more active voice in the region so that it can go against this authoritative trend. We have political and judicial issues compromising democracy, and the effects of political polarization, a lack of credibility among those who are representing social issues, government issues, the lack of judicial independence, the lack of credibility on the behalf of the judiciary, their lack of effectiveness because they are keeping those who violate human rights, they are going unpunished. And so democratic institutions and the countries are being affected. The pandemic has made this scenario of social dissatisfaction worse, and hate discourses, anti-democratic behavior have been fought, and they all go against human rights. So within that context, it's a huge challenge for the Inter-American Commission to make its contribution to strengthen the democratic identity of our country so that they can strengthen their own identities and to enforce human rights. What's key in this context would be to strengthen dialogue, multifaceted liaisons, and human rights through different actors in the states. We have to get ahead of those situations, and to do that, we need to have more protagonists, such as the Commission. We have to be more political. There has to be more dialogue. The Commission needs to take an in-depth look at dialogues with unions, human rights associations, different political actors, different authorities across the countries. The Commission has to have a more fluid dialogue with different sectors, the media, and partnerships with democratic governments in order to avoid this authoritarian trend. The worst case scenario is to lose because we have lost the representativity of these victims. Thank you so much, Andrea. We will now move to the third block. And a brief explanation about this block. There was a consultation with different civil society networks in order to listen to what is making people in our hemisphere restless. We have shared a questionnaire and we have asked people what the topics they would like to hear about were. We have received roughly 3 questions. We have received roughly 30 questions and we have selected 4 of them. Each of our applicants can answer to any of those 4 questions, and the topics we have here are weaknesses and strengths of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. What would be the 3 main weaknesses the Inter-American Commission is currently facing? And if elected, how would you contribute in order to overcome those weaknesses? The second topic are cautionary measure mechanisms. That is one of the main instruments the Commission has to protect human rights. The question is, how do you think this mechanism is working? And if you are elected, what would be your proposal to adjust it? The third topic is religious freedom and inclusion. The question is, what relationship do you find between the guarantee of religious freedom and the rest of human rights, particularly with the rights of LGBTI peoples and indigenous peoples? The fourth topic is migration. The question is, do you think there are any additional measures that the Iachr should take to address this phenomenon that is affecting the lives of so many people, both adults and children in our region? So which measures should the Commission implement? And the order to answer these questions will be: first, Mr. Edgar Stewart Rallon; second, Ms. Gloria Monique de Mes; then Mr. Pier Paolo Pigozzi; then Andrea; and finally, Mr. Christopher Arif Balkan. So now I will turn it over to Mr. Edgar Stewart Rallon. Thank you so much. These questions are very important, and I will be focusing on one specifically, the cautionary measure mechanisms. This is a key mechanism to protect human rights in the region. How do I think cautionary measures are working? In the last 4 years, the Inter-American Commission has improved its ability to respond in terms of frequency and strength through cautionary measures. But we need to recognize that in light of the number of requests and the time that this region is going through, that improvement, with historically high numbers in the last 4 numbers in terms of resolution, they're still not enough. There is no question that the Commission would have to improve its ability to respond. So which adjustments should be made to this instrument available to the Inter-American Commission? One of them would be to monitor each of these cautionary measures. Why? Because whenever there are cautionary measures, when you monitor them diligently, changes in assessing risk to people's lives or integrity must be monitored, communicated consistently to see if measures need to be strengthened, if the resolution needs to be changed, and when the risk ends, whether that cautionary measure shouldn't be lifted. So there has to be a risk assessment that will allow the situation to be improved on. And the criteria would be the risk to life requiring cautionary measures. And related to the previous question, some civil spaces have been closing. And it's not just the risk to life, somebody's life or their integrity. It's also the fact that people can't do what they need to be doing in a specific institution or within a specific space in society. Therefore, another adjustment would be to different instruments, such as you should combine cautionary measures with other instruments that the Commission has available to deal and address these issues. Because otherwise, these obstacles can stop people from doing what they need to do. So without any shadow of a doubt, we need to improve the instruments to have more effective response and to assess and monitor the other elements that are part of the context that need to be taken care of by the Commission. Therefore, I think that using cautionary measures should be combined with other instruments through a coordinated effort, and that undoubtedly could lead to a more effective solution so that the role of protecting human rights can be more effectively implemented and carried out. Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we will turn it over to Ms. Gloria Monique de Mes.
Thank you very much for very interesting topics.
We will now give the floor.
For very interesting topics. The topic that I would like to speak to is the first topic that speaks to weaknesses and strengthening the Commission. Over the course of 60 years, we have had one issue, I think, that is essential in terms of the Commission achieving its mandate. And that issue has to do with resources. As we grow in terms of actions in achieving towards achieving the mandate as a commission, of course, resources would be one that becomes scarce, not only financial resources, but also resources, human resources. In that regard, I would like to also speak on the second weakness or challenge, better said, that the Commission is confronted with, which is the backlog. It has been discussed throughout this particular session, but very important. The backlog means not just an administrative backlog. The backlog is a delay in enjoyment of human rights by specific groups or persons or petitioners. So very essential. Another area in terms of challenges or improvement is the area of representation of all the regions. We have seen now that there is a call for a focus on the Caribbean. This is not just only a focus on a region, but it is the focus on human rights issues in a particular context. The third issue is the issue that, for me, deals with, or it's maybe the fourth issue in this case, in engagement of future generations of youth. What do I think is important and what can be done and what would I contribute if elected? It would mean to have these discussions that need to be held on resources, on funding, that dialogue with member states in terms of the mandate that there is and the workload that there is in dealing with that in an effective and efficient way. And that might be contributing additionally to what is the budget right now. Secondly, in terms of human rights, human resources, look at partnerships that are possible, alliances that are possible with institutions in the region, academic institutions. I'm thinking of universities in the Caribbean. I'm joining these issues because I don't think that they're independent from each other. They're independent, they're interdependent, which means that there are more academic institutions in the region, in the Caribbean, the University of the West Indies, the University of Suriname, that could play an important role in the work of the Commission, not only in terms of awareness, but also in terms of monitoring, in terms of designing targeted capacity building exercises. Same as the collaboration with international agencies that are active on the ground, civil society organizations that are active on the ground. In all these weaknesses that I have identified, I think concerted efforts, identifying partners and allies is a strategic move towards achieving our mandates in an effective and efficient way.
Thank you very much, candidate. Sorry, but the alarm sounded and it was maybe not very, very loud. Thank you very much. Le damos la palabra a la candidata Lidia Casas. Adelante, Lidia, por favor.
We will give the floor now to Lydia. I decided to talk about a few topics. In first place, the weaknesses in the Commission, which has to do with the backlog of the cases and also the funding of the Commission. We have two areas that we have to discuss. The backlog isn't only associated to the workload of the Commission, with about 4,000 cases a year. But the backlog has a direct impact in how the states are working. One of the measures that we could consider when we have precautionary measures is that they have priority because of the severity of the violations. Likewise, we have to consider the possibility that already had contact with the case, they continue with the case so that not another team takes over and starts from scratch. And that way we can really finish the case. I think these are interesting issues. Funding. Funding is a very important point. And we have to fund based on not only the people that lend, but also those that receive the funding. And if there are any payment delays, we know that the terms have to be fulfilled. If a state does not deliver as he should, we have to consider like what happens internally. And I also want to focus on the freedom of religion. I think this is a discussion that doesn't only happen in the Americas, but in other parts of the world as well. The religious freedom means that you can practice your religion and that does not affect the rights of some groups of people. One of the issues that we have seen in this area is that there's no limit in relation to the rights of women, and you can oppose that and affecting the mental and physical health of the women. I think we have to consider all the interested parties involved, and we have to consider this in relation to sexual education and sexuality. We cannot put this issue aside. Children have the right of being educated by the parents and families according to their values, but the state also has the duty of supplying the tools so that the children understand where they are positioned. The children can't be exposed to lack of respect from others, and also the sexual diversity of society. Nowadays, the existing capacities to deal with this is very limited, and the Commission has to work together, counting with the OAS, and when someone is expelled, we sometimes can't reach a dialogue. And nowadays, we have to come to agreement so that we can reduce the number of people who are looking for a better quality of life in other countries, even risking their own life. And now we will give the floor to Pierre Pigossi. Going back to this topic of migration, this is an interesting topic because it could be an attempt of extending a necessary intervention. But we have to think, where will the new Commission go? And Gloria was saying, and I agree with her, many organizations have already worked and they help in terms of social problems, emergencies, and there are organizations that have social integration projects projects and welcome the migratory groups and refugees. And we don't have to double our efforts, but I believe that the problem with migration comes together with a dilemma of extraterritorial jurisdiction. And this is a big challenge for the trafficking issue, human trafficking, because that is a territorial problem, and the Commission has a transnational jurisdiction so that they can help the states and cooperate and identify where those sensitive points are in relation of treatment and trafficking of people. Now, what's the relationship between the freedom of religion and human rights of the LGBT people and indigenous people? I think this is a situation of interdependence. Many times we have to have these groups in a collision course to see how we can deal with them. But sometimes it's a false dichotomy. And I think that we have to present the problems without their nuances. So I think we have to individualize the problematic cases. We cannot generalize prejudices, and we have to approach the concrete problems with concrete solutions when there might be a tension, and that way eliminating those apparent tensions. But with regards to the strengths weaknesses of the inter-American system, I think we've all talked about dialogue. I agree with Lydia's idea of working with other branches of government and public players and private actors. And I would lean towards a joint effort, inviting them to projects that will give us a sustainable relationship, and that way we can continue building even where there is disagreement. And with so many opportunities which were presented by the Commission, I think we have to find a balance between the initiatives that we're going to take on and carefully consider. And the idea is that this Commission is a complementary entity. The less the Commission intervenes means that there is less violation of human rights. At the moment, we have some problems, and there is intervention to have more responsibility in their work. Okay, now we will give the floor to Andrea. I think all the topics mentioned and all the questions are very interesting. The precautionary measures are essential and they have to be strengthened. The rights of indigenous people, freedom of religions, the LGBTI people, all these things are essential in the inter-American system. And we cannot be hypocrites. The rights of migrants and the violence that they suffer, the forced migrations, they are pandemic in our region, and we have to give them special attention. But I'm going to focus on the weaknesses and strengths of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. I love the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. And whatever criticisms of or weakness, it's not that I don't respect it. I believe that the people of Americas, they need this commission And I think that the Commission should have a stronger role. And one of the weaknesses is the lack of impact because they don't implement the standards of the Commission. It's not the moment to develop standards. The Inter-American Commission has many standards. We have to implement these standards and norms. And the standardization to these standards and public policies and training of these political operators would lead to institutional reforms in, for example, the judiciary, and strengthening the national human rights institutions. I think we have to implement the standards. Another deficit of the Inter-American Commission has to do with the backlog. The Iachr should discuss the proliferation of these cases and how they can deal with these cases and how they can be judged. And then there are repetitive cases, and that way the states can solve the backlog and acknowledge the responsibilities. Another weakness is the non-universal aspect that we should bring to the Commission, and we have to ratify all the treaties. Thank you very much. Now we will give the floor to Christopher Alibuka.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to civil society for these very interesting questions. I'd like to focus on the question on religious freedom, one on substance, and if time permits, the question on the weaknesses and strengthening of the Iachr. It's starting with the topic 3, religious freedom. The question asks about the relationship between the guarantee of religious freedom and the rest of human rights, particularly with regard to LGBTI persons. What I wanted to say about this, first of all, is that what you have with religious rights and other rights is a clash of rights, insofar as protecting them can sometimes have discriminatory results. In my view, the appropriate test in resolving this conflict is not the standard limitations analysis, but rather that of balancing rights, which you don't often see in international human rights jurisprudence. Now, there are 2 points I'd like to make about this. The first thing is when we talk about religious rights, the first scrutiny that you have to make is whether the claim is properly characterized as a right. And I'm going to give you a small example. Sometimes there has been a lot of domestication, and I mean domestic from various parts of the world, as well as regional litigation around claims based on religion to chastise a child, in other words, for corporal punishment. But many have said that is not that's not a right, so-called, because once it involves violence, inflicting violence on another, that is not properly a right. So the first thing we have to establish is that not just the mere claim of something being a religious right doesn't necessarily mean it's recognized as such in law. The second thing is that once you have the right that's valuable and worthy of protection, the approach should be accommodating both rights that might be clashing, but only so far as there is no harm caused. So, for instance, a state can easily permit a woman to wear a hijab, which causes no harm, contrary to the position taken in some European countries, for instance. But it cannot permit state officials from refusing to officiate at same-sex marriages, which is a pushback we've been seeing, because that is deeply humiliating to LGBT persons, and it reinforces stigma and discrimination by perpetuating prejudices and stereotypes. So my ultimate point is that once something is properly characterized as a right, the appropriate test when it runs up against other rights, whether it's rights of LGBTI persons or indigenous peoples or women, is the extent to which you can accommodate both without causing harm or inconvenience. Perhaps briefly, in the time remaining, I'd like to look at the weaknesses and weaknesses of the Iachr. It's had a lot of attention already today, but I'll mention quickly 3 of them that we've heard before: the procedural backlog, the problems with compliance, and ultimately disaffection with the system as a whole. In terms of the backlog, I've mentioned some of these strategies already in terms of repetitive cases and systematization. What I would like to caution here is that in addressing the backlog, we must be mindful of not going to the other extreme and then denying relief to genuine victims. On compliance, close monitoring is extremely important. And finally, in terms of disaffection, I would stress the existing methodologies of the system, the dialogue that we've heard so much about, in terms of keeping governments engaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Alguien busca eso. Para la cuarta ronda, le cedo la
And for
palabra.
the 4th round, I'd like to turn it over to Hannah from DPLF. Dear applicants, good afternoon again. And to conclude, each panelist will have 2 minutes for their closing remarks. We'll have Glory Monique Demez, Edgar Stuart Rallon, Andrea Bodchak, Christopher Pierpaolo Pigozzi, and Lydia Casas Becerra. So, please, applicant Demez, go ahead.
Thank you. Our ultimate goal is the fulfillment, is the full enjoyment of human rights of all in this hemisphere. The Commission has a mandate to promote human rights and the protection of human rights in the region. But that duty is on all of us, on states, on civil society, on international and regional organizations, and in order to speak of human rights, the future of human rights in the Americas and the region, and Americas and the Caribbean, we need to engage youth. It needs to be a concerted effort on all our parts. Thank you very much for this engagement, because I consider this a concerted effort. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, candidato de Mir. Le doy la palabra al comisionado.
Thank you so much. And now, Edgar Stuart Rallon.
No sé si me escuchan. Muchas gracias, candidato de Mir. Le doy la palabra ahora al comisionado Rallon.
Commissioner Rallon? Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here, to participate in this panel. It's wonderful to be here with the other applicants and the voices that have asked for the Commission to be strengthened and to have a better balance, a regional balance, so that it can exercise with the different applicants in the Commission. I am the only applicant from Central America, and we need to have all voices of the continent represented. So Central America should have a position in the Commission, so that for the next 4 years, it doesn't lack this representation of Central America. It would be key to be able to make contribution to the debates, to the proposals, to the initiatives initiatives talking about the concept, the context, the specificities, and needs. It's been an honor to be part of the Commission in the last 4 years, and it would be an honor to continue to be a part of it, to make a contribution as the only representative of Central America in the Commission, because I think it could enrich discussions and the region. Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner. And now, applicant Pochak. Well, thank you so much. These initiatives are key to provide transparency to the candidacy process. I am an applicant through the candidate of Argentina. I ran with 3 other people through public hearing, assessing our merits, our history. We had to answer questions from organizations, people from the academia, and experts. And I think those procedures to select candidates need to be fostered across the regions. You know my history. I have knowledge. I'm fully committed to human rights. I have always done everything independently with the right criteria, and human rights are my only criteria. So I hope that the selection process of the commissioners will lead to a strengthening of the Inter-American Commission, and we are relying on the representatives of civil society to monitor it. Thank you. Thank you, candidate Pochak, and now candidate Arif Bulkin.
Thank you again. And I'd like to return to the second question, which raised the problems of a shrinking civil space, attacks on human rights defenders and the media, judicial independence, weakening of civil society, only to say that these are challenges that are well known across the region. And what I was saying before is that even if all do not exist in any particular place, there are problems that we see individually, perhaps, or one in one place or another. In this context, in this overall context, coupled with the fact of escalating poverty and inequalities across the region, the relevance of the Inter-American Commission is higher than ever for all of us. I appreciate very much the history, the august and stellar history of the Commission, and value this exercise in finding and identifying the most qualified candidates, the most independent candidates for this really crucial and pivotal role in our region. In terms of my own background, as I've said before, I've had a lifetime of experience, professional experience in human rights, in terms of my work across a range of issues, but from multiple perspectives, both domestic within my own country, but also regional across the Caribbean, and international as well on the UN Human Rights Committee. So it is this experience that I wish to bring to the Inter-American Commission, but more so along with my own personal sensibilities, a deep faith in the morality of the protection of human rights, but also a deep faith in their utilitarian value. And a deep faith as well in the system's core value of promoting a dignified life for all. So it is this experience and this knowledge and this personal ethic that I hope to bring if elected to the Inter-American Commission. So I'd like to thank civil society for providing me with this opportunity, and Sahil as well. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, candidato.
Thank you so much, applicant. And now, applicant Pigozzi. Thank you. I also want to thank the panel for the invitation, and I think the work the Commission will do with those of us who are elected after this general meeting will be highly technical work. There will be an exchange of ideas, and This process has been very interesting already, and it will be highly motivating to work with such dignified professionals as those that we have been sharing all of these days, this morning and this afternoon with you. My professional experience spans 20 years in human rights. Since the beginning of my career until now, I've worked with the government, governmental institutions, the Constitutional Court in Ecuador, as well as UN agencies and the FAO, and in the last few years, I've been working much more closely with academic issues, people outside of Ecuador, and this should be an obstacle to civil society, quite the opposite. In my own personal life, I have always taken part in community life. I'm always open to listening to needs, criticisms, to dialogue, and it will be a pleasure to be at the disposal of all of you and the Inter-American Commission. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. And to conclude this block, I turn it over to applicant Casas. Thank you so much. I have 4 points. First, the promotion of human rights. We haven't said much about the role of education and its impact on human rights. And children, we need to make sure that they understand full respect to all people and their differences. So one thing we need to make sure of, and the Commission needs to make sure of, is to promote through education all of these criteria for the future generation through basic education, universities, all educational institutions. Secondly, we must strengthen the system through different mechanisms. There isn't one single one. There is no single recipe. We need to think in different ways. It's not just about punishment. We also need to monitor, to have technical support to make sure that there is compliance. And our duty is to make sure that it continues. And the third one has to do with dialogue, internal dialogues as well. We have different perspectives here. And international law is a shared topic. We need to make sure that there's an agenda that will really promote human rights. And there has to be external dialogue with different states and civil society organizations. And there has to be interdisciplinarity. Sometimes we're very short-sighted. We just talk to one another in a language that often can't be shared with the rest of society. And independence. We need to make sure that we are independent to criticize even governments whenever required. Thank you. Thank you so much, applicant Casas. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This has been a very important dialogue that complements the presentations before the OAS Permanent Council and strengthens the exchange with civil society in the region. I want to remind everyone who's joined us that this event has been recorded and will be available on social media and the organizations very soon. Thank you so much for joining us.